Good morning. I'm Robert Gurrell, and I'm the senior minister at Centenary United Methodist Church. And I'm about 1 week out of surgery, and I'm in that part where you're doing recovery and you're doing all the physical therapy. And I got to say, it's a little bit harder than I imagined it would be. The surgery had some complications, which have made it even more challenging, but I'm up and I'm around, and things are progressing. And we want to say thanks to all of you for your prayers and your concern and the great support of this wonderful congregation. Thank you. We're going to talk today to begin a series that really, to me, is crucial in the life of our congregation. A few years ago, I was asked by the bishop to lead a group to study Methodism in Oklahoma and to make projections where we were going over the next 20 years. And I have to be honest and say the projections were not good. Based on the current numbers, worship attendance, professions of faith, confirmands, things like that, we would expect to lose about 50% of our congregations over the next 20 years. That's a devastating thing to hear. And in truth, it is just numbers. I mean, things can certainly change that. But that's the trend that we've been following now for several decades, and that projects on out into the next 20 years. And when I was doing that for the work of the conference, of course I couldn't help but think about our own congregation. And I became absolutely determined that we were going to be the kind of church that beat those trends, that we were going to be able to look at the life of our congregation 20 years and beyond. There was a guy named Bishop Robert Centenary in Missouri. And Robert Centenary did another study, which was very interesting. He looked at the kind of churches that were succeeding and the kind of Christians that were growing in their faith. And he looked for what they had in common. And he found that there were 5 practices that these Christians had as individuals and these congregations had that were growing and alive and thriving. And so that's what the next few weeks are going to be about. We're going to be sharing with you the 5 practices adapted by our church council for our congregation that will help us thrive and grow into the next 20 years. Despite trends in the culture and trends in churches, Centenary is special and unique, and this is something that we can really do. Now, there's a real difference between talking about practices versus vision or mission statements. These are things we do. These are the things we do every day that we believe are going to incorporate in our lives as Christians and as a Christian community together the ability to live as though we're in the kingdom. At least we're beginning to experience that, and we're able to share that with the people around us. In fact, that was Senacy's question. What is it about these people and these churches that they're able to live as though they're already experiencing the kingdom of Jesus Christ, and they're able to share that? We're going to look at each of those 5 practices today, beginning with the practice of radical hospitality. Radical hospitality. Hospitality being the greeting and the welcoming. And radical is taking it to that next extreme level. When I was in surgery and I came out of surgery, the doctor came in and said to me, well, things were pretty tough. And there was a lot of damage. I was going to be staying in the hospital longer than expected, and the recovery was going to be a lot more difficult than expected. And I got to tell you that it was hard to hear. It was absolutely just difficult to hear those words. That night I went to sleep, knowing that I wouldn't be going home when I thought I would. And I had this dream. I had a dream about my grandson, Luke. My grandson's an awesome kid, and he's a big runner. He runs track, cross country, all those kinds of things. And I dreamed that I was at one of his track meets, which I often am. And I had my camera, and I was taking pictures of Luke running. And suddenly, in front of all the people, Luke said, Papa, come down and run with me. Come down and finish the race with me. And I felt myself lifted up with such a spiritual power that I was able to come down out of the stands This is all in my dream. And I was able to stand beside my grandson, and we took our first step and our second step, and soon this leg that's been surgically repaired was functioning beautifully, and I was running and racing again, just like I was when I was Luke's age, and I could look at him laughing, my family cheering, and the excitement of being able to run that course because of his invitation and his desire that I have that experience with him. He loves to run, and he wanted me to be a part of that. That's what radical hospitality is. It's taking this experience we have of Jesus Christ, this incredible, wonderful, amazing experience of love and acceptance, and sharing it with people around us, meeting them where they are, meeting them as they are, loving them as they are, and simply sharing with them the invitation to know Jesus Christ. As Bishop Centenary explains it in his book, the concept of invitation is twofold. It's a great Methodist concept. You know, we as Methodists believe that first we're invited by Christ, and then we share the invitation. We really can't share the invitation of Jesus Christ until we have received it ourselves and accepted it. So invitation means both receiving and accepting the invitation of Jesus Christ to be a part of his kingdom, and then being willing to take that invitation and share it with people around us. That forms our identity, that forms who we are. When I talk about radical hospitality, Centenary says, it's got to pervade the whole life of the congregation. Every cell has to vibrate with it. It's an outward focus. Churches that practice radical hospitality are constantly examining every one of their ministries and saying, how do we become more attuned to the call of God and reach out to other people? When Prudy and I were first married, we took the kids and we moved into a tiny little parsonage, the little church of Noble United Methodist Church, just outside of Norman. It was a little tiny church. I'd been the associate at a very large church. It was a whole new experience for us. My wife would call and say, could you have lunch today? And I would say, just a minute, I'll have to check with the staff. I'd hold the phone out and say, yeah, okay, we can do it. I was it. We were there and just getting started. There were 30 people coming on Sunday mornings at worship. Because of the hospital in Norman, because of the factories, people began to move into that community. But they weren't like the people of Noble United Methodist Church. Some were black, some were white, some were Asian, some were Hispanic. And we started to feel as a congregation that somehow we're called to find a way to reach out to people, these people around us. They weren't the traditional white farm families of South Central Oklahoma. As I struggled with how to do that, I consulted with one of the real saints of the church, a lady named Frances. And Miss Frances said, well, what we're going to have to do, Pastor, is we're going to have to ask every single family in this church. And by that, what she meant is for the next few weeks, we would come night after night to Miss Frances's house, and she would serve beans and cornbread, and me, the pastor, and my wife Prudy and Frances, we would meet with a family from Noble United Methodist Church. And we would share with them the dream that we could reach these families that were moving in around us. Even though they were different than us, even though they looked different and talked different and culturally were different, racially were different. And one by one, each family in that congregation made a commitment to welcome and show hospitality to the people, especially those new people in our community. In less than a year, Noble United Methodist Church was producing more professions of faith than any Methodist church in Oklahoma City. Because those people took what they learned at Miss Frances' table, and they went to their neighbor, and they went to the person they worked with, and they invited them for a sandwich or took them for a Coke and said, come be a part of our church. We're trying to do something new and different and exciting. The color of that church changed. The character of that church changed. And it became a church in which you walked in and you experienced the kingdom of God. St. Paul is saying the same thing to the church in Rome. He's writing to those Christians who have gone through every kind of hardship. And it's the only church that Paul ever wrote to that he had never visited. He didn't know them personally. But he looked at them and he said, if you guys can do this, if you can take rich people and poor people, if you can take people of one color and another color, if you can take people who are slaves and people who are free, if you can take soldiers and if you can take women and children and men and people of all ages, and if you can bring them together in this church, you'll do something that will set the empire spinning. You'll be building the kingdom of Jesus Christ. He starts off with a series of illustrations in which he reminds them of times in which Jews and Gentiles throughout the history of the Bible had come together and worshiped. And he tells them that this was everything you read about in the Bible was God's way of preparing this congregation for this time. And then he writes those beautiful words in verse 7. Welcome one another, just as Christ welcomed you for the glory of God. There's no more powerful sentence than that in the entire Bible. Welcome one another, therefore, just as Christ has welcomed you for the glory of God. Think about what those words say. The word that Paul uses in Greek that we translate as welcome, it means to receive someone with total acceptance, without judgment, without concern about their racial background, their sexual orientation, their age, or anything else. It means simply to accept them, to meet them on the road where they are, and to embrace them and offer them friendship. He says, welcome one another. Why? Because Christ welcomed you that way. You have experienced the total and complete acceptance of Jesus Christ. I imagine most of you are sitting in the pew today for the same reason I'm in church on Sunday. Because somewhere in your life there was a moment when you thought you were unacceptable and unworthy. And then you experienced the overwhelming grace and love of Jesus Christ. Paul is saying to take that moment when your first faith was first kindled in your heart, and let those embers burst into fire again, and to share that and welcome the people around you in the same way, to bring alive again in your own faith the experience of being loved and cherished by Jesus Christ. And the only way you can really do that is by inviting someone else to share it. It sometimes happens in the simplest ways. It happens because we invite someone out for a Coke. Or we drop by a dozen cookies. Or we just sit and talk with someone a few minutes after school or work. And we say, I have something in my life that matters to me, and if you're ever interested, I'd love for you to join me. Not come meet me, not show up if you want to, but I'd like to take you, sit with you, and be with you in the hopes that you might experience what I've experienced. Now, the apostle says something really important at this point. He says we do this for a particular reason, not to add to the church roll, not to get some kind of spiritual gold star. He says we do it for the glory of God. Now that's really interesting. The glory of God means to show God's supernatural power. It's the shining Shekinah of God leading Israel through the night in a pillar of fire. It's the light that shines on Christ on the mountain of transfiguration. It's that moment when Christ is baptized and the dove descends. Incredible supernatural power of God. And what the apostle is saying is, when you show hostility to someone, when you welcome them, when you bring them, when you greet them as they come in the building, you're doing that not because you think you have the power to make any great difference, but because you believe in your heart of heart that God has the power. When you're inviting someone, when you're welcoming someone, when you're showing someone extraordinary and radical hospitality, you're doing that because you're depending and you have faith that God will bring around the necessary transformation in that person's life. See, it's our job to offer the invitation, but the ultimate work is done by Christ, just as it was in our life, in their life as well. I think this is the most important thing in the future of Centenary United Methodist Church. We do so many things so well. You have a loving congregation. You know how to worship. You know how to take care of each other. You have a great tolerance. We have people that are so far on this side and so far on that side politically, yet they love each other and minister and work together and cherish each other. But this is the key for us at Centenary. Will we be the kind of congregation that extends our welcome beyond our doors? Will we be the kind of church that invites others to come and enjoy and experience those precious things that are life-changing to us? I can tell you for a fact that if we do that, if you make that commitment to invite and welcome people, the future of our church is unlimited. To not do it is to not live as a church. I believe Centenary can do it. I believe every one of you wants to do it. Now you have permission to do it, and you know the why for doing it. To welcome, to greet, is simply to show another person the heart of Christ that you yourself have experienced. One of the most precious things I have is a letter from a young lady who visited our church last Advent season. She wrote it to me after she had visited and returned to her home state. She didn't even join our church, but it's so precious because it describes exactly what I think Centenary is capable of. She said that she was in town visiting her family, that she had just left a relationship where she was being physically abused and where her child was being physically abused. She was home with the family trying to recover. One day she was in a store and a member of our congregation walked up to her and engaged her in a conversation. They'd gone to school together, hadn't seen each other in a while. And that member of our congregation invited this young lady to come and bring her son and sit with her on one of the Sundays of Advent. She wrote me and she said that, it ran through my mind all about how I'm unworthy, I have a terrible life, my relationships have all ended in failure, I don't know where I'm going from here, I'm just trying to heal from my wounds. There was everything in my head that told me not to come. But there was something about my friend's invitation and her willingness to pick me up, to bring me, to sit with me, and to just be present with me that made me want to come. And so for several Sundays during the Advent season, I found a spiritual home at Centenary United Methodist Church. And I just wanted to say thank you for that. I walked in, and as I was walking down the hall, an older gentleman came up and greeted me, and he was so friendly, just like a member of the family. My child was treated in a way that she felt very, very special. We went to worship, and because the people around us were excited about worship, I became excited too. And when I heard the music, I thought every song was just for me. And when I heard the sermon, I thought every word was written for me. Because of that invitation and the hospitality of your congregation, we have a chance for a new life. Radical hospitality is not about church membership. It's not about putting more names on the roll. It's about opening doors in people's lives and helping them know Jesus Christ in a way that completely transforms their lives. This is the word of God for us today. Amen.